You might be wondering why this is so chaotic up here. So if you're OCD like me, you've been thinking about it since you got here, so let me just release your pressure. Tonight, there's a concert. We rehearsed on Thursday. It was easier not to have to move it back and forth. So we're adjusting, right? Sometimes, all we can do is sing. Prior to the fall of the Berlin Wall, there were weeks of peaceful protests by the citizens of Leipzig. And those peaceful protests are acknowledged as being a huge part that led to the fall of the wall. Gathering on Monday evenings by candlelight around St. Nikolai Church, the church where Bach composed many of his cantatas, people would gather and sing. For over 2 months, their numbers grew from a few hundred to a few thousand to the weeks preceding the fall of the wall to 300,000 people singing, over half of the city's residents. Singing songs of hope and protest and justice until their song shook the powers of their nation and changed the world as we know it. Sometime after the fall, a journalist asked one of the commanders of East Germany's secret police why they hadn't crushed the protesters like they had so many others before. And he replied, "We had no contingency plan for singing." Sometimes, all we can do is sing. Simeon knows that. Anna does as well. But truth be told, we often forget that in our world of images and noise and incessant talk, sometimes songs awaken us back to reality. Have you ever been driving and you hear a song come on the radio and you remember that first date? Or that meaningful moment, or that time when you lost somebody you love? Songs awaken in us things that other things can't. We saw it at the Berlin Wall, creating solidarity, and we saw it in the picket lines with MLK and the civil rights movement. As people were being hit with rocks and water and dogs and fists, we heard this song, "We Shall Overcome," ring out and speak truth to a movement that buoyed the hearts and souls to stand even in the most difficult realities. In my own college days, as I was suffering through my first bout of depression, there was a singer, a gospel singer named Crystal Lewis. And she had a song, I don't remember the title of it, but the opening phrase was, "God, all I have to give is a broken heart, torn apart. It's all I've got left to give." And that song was the thing that kept me alive in those moments. We saw it a few months back at a college on Asbury's campus where a multi-week revival came to them in the form of music. Sometimes, all we can do is sing. According to Luke, it's now 40 days after Jesus' birth. Now, after 8 days, there were 3 kind of rules that you had to follow when you had children as a Jewish family. The first one was at 8 days, you would circumcise your son, if you had a son, and you would give them their name. So this would have been the moment where family would have come to the house. It wasn't until after 900 that you would do circumcision at the temple. Prior to this moment, they would just come to your house and the religious leaders would come there and your family would be there and they would have this ritual that would make a child cry and everybody would celebrate. And then they would give that child their name. The second ritual happened at 31 days. This was a ritual for the father. The father would sacrifice a cow and a sheep and bring that to the altar in celebration and offering of their child to God. And the third was at 40 days, and this was for the mother. And they had two options according to Hebrew law. One was either to sacrifice a cow if you had money, but if you didn't, you would sacrifice 2 turtle doves without a partridge in a pear tree. So part of what this scripture tells us that Jeff read is that Mary and Joseph were people of very little means. And they brought Jesus into the temple at 40 days for Mary's purification rite. If you had a baby boy, you were responsible to bring your boy and yourself and go through a rite of purification. If you had a girl, you would bring your girl at 60 days. Why? Who knows? You can imagine as Mary and Joseph walked in, it felt like every other ritual they had done. Now, when we think about church, we think about places like this. The temple was different. The temple would have felt more like the mall at Christmas, right? Because you imagine how many babies are born and how many death rituals are happening and how many things that the temple celebrates are going on at any given time. So you would have had different religious leaders across different parts of the temple, and they'd be offering sacrifices, engaging, and doing all the things that they were to do. So it would have been this hustle and bustle, and in walks Mary and Joseph, and they have their beautiful little baby, and some crazy old guy walks up and grabs their baby and starts to sing. I don't know about you, but I can bet you that the parents who are sitting in the back of the room would feel like that's very unsettling if I went and grabbed your baby and started singing right now. I won't do that, P.S. Simeon was an old man. He was an old man waiting to see the Messiah as he had been promised. Now get this. Simeon didn't see any miracles. He didn't see any signs of Jesus. He didn't see any of Jesus' wonders. He simply saw baby Jesus, and he's saying, Lord, now let your servant depart in peace according to your word, for my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared for me. No miracles, no signs, no wonders, just wisdom. Wisdom from the Spirit of God sang in his soul so much that he couldn't help sing to them. He just saw the Christ child. He believed, and that was enough. Then we have this story of Anna, who had been a widower for 84 years. She was a prophetess. A poor woman who just came to the temple every day to pray. There were also no miracles for her. No signs, no wonder. Just this consistent connection of wisdom between her and the Spirit of God that spoke to her soul. So when she saw the Christ child, she too believes. Simeon sees Jesus and he picks him up, and he can't help but sing. But note what he's singing. He's not singing about angels on high. He's not singing about shepherds or 3 wise men. He's not singing about mangers, but instead, he's singing a song about letting go, about releasing his life, about God fulfilling what God promised. Because in the infant Jesus, he sees that the Lord has kept his promises. Not just to him, But the Lord has kept his promises to Israel and to all of the world, and he's trusting in God's promises. And he's in the process of believing that God is who God says he was going to be. Now Simeon is saying, God, I've seen it, I can let go. You were faithful to Israel, you are faithful to me. Anna sings next, but her songs are not death songs. Her songs are praise and thanksgiving. And don't lose sight in this passage who is the prophet in the room. It's not Simeon, it's Anna. She too receives this Christ child as a sign that God keeps God's promises, and all she can do is respond with songs of thanksgiving. Here in Simeon's song of courage and death and Anna's song of thanksgiving, we match that with the coming anticipation of the next few days before Christmas. I don't know about you, but in our house, everything that's being talked about is we're out of school in 2 days, we're out of school in 2 days, Christmas presents, what did you get me, Christmas presents, we're out of school in 2 days. There's this hustle and bustle, but in the midst of it, you can feel this joy beginning to build. You can feel this excitement begin to come together, much like it would have been for Anna as she just waited day after day in faithfulness. Here in the story, the wonder of God came down in vulnerable flesh of Jesus to take on our lot in life and to set all things right again. And Anna and Simeon remind us that sometimes it feels like we're waiting forever for God to do what God says he's going to do. Songs have power. Songs continue to create life and light. Songs give us hope and allow us to express what's deep inside of us. Songs share the story of Jesus. Sometimes all we can do is sing, and that's not a bad thing. Now, the other piece of what I love about this passage is I love the faithful waiting of two older adults. I love this story as we enter Christmas and close our season of waiting and watching and enter into the Christmas time. These wise vessels remind us that whatever we're carrying on our hearts, whatever God has placed in you from the beginning that's not quite finished, don't give up hope. Don't quit hoping. Don't quit praying. Don't lose your joy. Don't lose your sight. Some of you have been praying for the kids in your home for 30 years, 40 years, 60 years, 70 years. And you know that God made a promise to you in the very innermost part of your being that God would not leave you, forsake you, and God would not leave you and forsake your children. Hold that hope. It's not done. Simeon and Anna remind us that God isn't done. The thing is, more often than not, when I sit with older adults, I walk away blown away with how open-hearted and faithful and visionary they are. In our congregation, it is no exaggeration to say that the older folks in our community are more often the radical disciples. They were being faithful before cell phones and the internet. They were civil rights pioneers, anti-war activists, soldiers for Christ in the war on poverty. We have members who were openly gay, faithful Christians before that was even allowed to be. In their retirement, they are the soul of our church. I can name many in our community who are the ones who keep a prayer list and pore over it and pray over the names and the personal tragedies, asking for God's specific mercy for each one of us as we fill out those prayer requests on our cards. They prepare dinners for families where the young mother is receiving chemo or is struggling just to make it through their day as a new mom. They sit quietly among friends who have lost their lover of 50 years and just sit and are in the presence as they grieve. They attend an otherwise sparse daytime funeral for a member who suffered for years with untreated mental illness, and they show up and celebrate their life. They sit in pews every Sunday, whether the sermon is good or lousy or somewhere in between. And all the while, as I'm having these conversations with many of you in our community, what I hear from you on the other side is a fear that you might not have enough to offer. Hear me, church. You have everything to offer. Your wisdom, your attentiveness to the Spirit and to life hold us in balance. When the refrain that was stuck in my head of God, I've got nothing left to give but a broken heart torn apart. It was a late middle-aged man who said to me, Rustin, it's not done. Don't give up hope. Somebody who wasn't even there to speak into my life chose to step in and to pick up my soul and sing to it and say, you have so much more to give than a broken heart. You are the ones listening and watching and aware enough to recognize the Christ baby coming to the temple that day. There was a late Presbyterian pastor and poet named David Steele who wrote about Simeon. And in this poem, he tells the story of Simeon as an old codger. Just an angry old church dude, right? Just complaining about everything, doing what he does. And he tells the story that Simeon just got so ticked off waiting for God to show up that every baby that came into the temple, he picked it up and just sang at it. Singing, you are the Savior of the world. It's meant to be funny, but this image of Simeon becomes quite beautiful. The poem reads, when I read the blessing and I thought about it, I begin to wish that he was right about Simeon and those babies. And I began to think about our babies. And I wished some Simeon might hold my grandbabies and my babies high and yours, the born ones and the not yet born, proclaiming to them with great conviction, you are the saviors of the world. Meaning it so absolutely that these youngins would live into it and love it and make it happen. See, it's not that we are saviors, we babies, we young ones in the church, not at all. It's just that for those who have walked the long road of faith, who have held on to the long cord of life in their hands and felt it fray and felt the rope burns as it was pulled from them, but also found it indescribably sturdy as they waited on the Lord, believing that God was not finished. That as they hold our babies and proclaim truth over them, that the reward is joy and that it comes true. That we get to be co-creators alongside this powerful God who comes to us in the most vulnerable form and proclaims on this day and every day, it is not done. I am not finished. There is more to come. Joy comes in the evening. Joy comes when we can say with all saints, Lord, now let your servant depart in peace according to your word, for my eyes have seen salvation, which you have prepared before the face of all people to light and lighten our world. May it be so.